The haunted patient. Esme had heard the stories about the old hospital for years. People spoke of strange voices, shadows moving on their own, and doors slamming shut for no reason. It was a place no one wanted to go, especially at night. But when her mother fell seriously ill, she had no choice. The only nearby hospital was full, and the old hospital was the only place that could take her in. The night they brought her mother in, the rain was pouring down hard, creating an even more sinister atmosphere. The hallway lights flickered, and the sound of thunder rumbled through the building. Esme pushed her mother's wheelchair through the long corridors, feeling as if they were being watched. They reached a room at the end of the hall. It was small and dimly lit, with a metal bed in the center. Esme helped her mother lie down and sat in a chair next to the bed, waiting for the doctor. The silence was unsettling, broken only by the occasional sound of rain hitting the windows. Suddenly, Esme heard a whisper. She looked around but saw no one. She thought it was her imagination. But then the whisper came again, louder this time. It seemed to come from the hallway. She stood up slowly, trying not to alarm her mother, and stepped out of the room. The hallway was empty, but the whisper continued, leading her toward a door at the end of the corridor. The door had a sign that read "No Entry." Esme hesitated, but curiosity got the better of her. She opened the door and descended a set of stairs leading to the basement. The basement was dark and damp, with a musty smell filling the air. Esme turned on her phone's flashlight and moved forward. The whisper had turned into a wail, like someone was crying. Following the sound, she entered a room filled with old gurneys and dusty medical equipment. In the center of the room stood a figure, head bowed. A chill ran down Esme's spine. The figure lifted its head and looked at her with empty, pain-filled eyes. It was a patient, dressed in a hospital gown, but its skin was gray and covered in scars. The patient opened its mouth and let out a scream that echoed through the basement. Esme stepped back, but she tripped and fell to the ground. Her phone slipped from her hand and the light went out, plunging the basement into darkness. She could hear footsteps approaching. Desperate, she tried to grab her phone, but her hands were shaking too much. The footsteps stopped next to her. She could feel the cold breath of the figure on her face. She closed her eyes, praying it was just a nightmare. Suddenly, the phone's light turned on again, and the figure was gone. Esme scrambled to her feet and ran back up the stairs, not daring to look back. When she reached her mother's room, she found her awake, staring at the door. "Who was that?" her mother asked, her voice trembling. Esme didn't know what to say. She sat next to her mother, trying to calm down. The hallway lights were still flickering, and the sound of the rain was louder than ever. That night, neither of them could sleep. The whispers continued, along with the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Esme knew they weren't alone in that hospital. The stories were true, and now they were part of them. The figure of the patient kept appearing in her thoughts, and the fear kept her on edge. Dawn brought a bit of relief, but Esme knew she would never forget that night. The old hospital remained a place of terror, and her experience there only confirmed that some ghost stories were real. The night shift. Caleb had just started his new job as a night shift janitor at the Old State Hospital in Ohio. It was a quiet job, mostly cleaning empty hallways and dusty rooms. The hospital was partially shut down. Only a few wings were still in use, and the rest of the building remained eerily silent. Caleb liked the solitude. It gave him time to think. One night, Caleb was mopping the floor in an old and used wing when he heard a faint humming. He paused, listening. The sound seemed to be coming from one of the patient rooms down the hall. Curious, he followed the sound, the dim lights casting long shadows on the walls. He reached room 413, the source of the humming. The door was slightly ajar, and as he pushed it open, the humming stopped. The room was empty, just an old bed and some broken furniture. Caleb shrugged and went back to his work, thinking it was just his imagination. But the humming returned the next night. This time, Caleb decided to investigate further. He brought his phone and used its flashlight to peer into the corners of the room. On the wall opposite the bed, he noticed something strange. A small, old-fashioned music box. Caleb picked up the music box, examining it. It was intricately designed, with delicate carvings and a tiny ballerina inside. He turned the key, and the ballerina began to spin, the music playing softly. The tune was familiar, but he couldn't place it. As he stood there, the room grew colder. Caleb felt a chill run down his spine. He decided to leave the music box and return to his duties. As he walked out, he heard the humming again, louder this time. He turned around, but the room was still empty. Uneasy, he hurried down the hallway. The following nights, the humming persisted. It became a nightly occurrence, always coming from room 413. Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was trying to get his attention. He began to ask around, but his co-workers just shrugged it off, saying the old hospital was full of strange noises. Determined to uncover the mystery, Caleb started spending more time in room 413. He brought a small notebook, jotting down anything unusual. One night, as he was writing, the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. He could see his breath in the air. The music box started playing on its own, the ballerina spinning faster and faster. Caleb felt a presence behind him. He turned slowly and saw a figure standing in the doorway, a woman in an old hospital gown, her face pale and eyes hollow. She looked at Caleb with a sorrowful expression. Then she pointed to the music box. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Caleb's heart pounded. "How?" he asked, his voice shaking. The woman pointed to a spot under the bed. Caleb crouched down and saw a loose floorboard. He pried it open and found a small, dusty journal inside. The cover had the name Lily written on it. Caleb opened the journal and began to read. It was filled with entries from a young woman named Lily, who had been a patient in the hospital many years ago. She wrote about her loneliness, her fear, and the music box her mother had given her. The last entry spoke of a terrible accident and her wish to find peace. As Caleb finished reading, he looked up and saw Lily standing by the window, her form faint and translucent. She smiled at him, a look of gratitude in her eyes, before slowly fading away. The room warmed up and the music box stopped playing. Caleb took the journal to the hospital's records office the next day, hoping to find more information about Lily. He learned that she had died tragically in the hospital and that her spirit had been restless ever since. By finding her journal and understanding her story, Caleb had helped her find peace. The humming never returned and room 413 became just another empty room. Caleb continued his job, but he always felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing he had helped a lost soul. The old state hospital still held its secrets, but Caleb no longer feared the night shift. Instead, he embraced it, ready for whatever mysteries the darkness might bring.